was going on. Like he has like solid.
Sure. Okay, so while people are grabbing pizza, I'm going to kind of get stuff started in case we have some people viewing online and they're wondering what the hell is going on. So I'm Eric. If you haven't seen me before, then you're new here. And David is the one running around. He's kind of back and forth, but he's hanging out by pizza. Hey, Dave, wave. Dave, wave. So Dave's hungry. And then we've got Alexis is going to be talking today. And then we also have Derek who's going to give a little intro to Ethereum.
We got Ethereum on screen.
So that's us. Sponsors, so we've got Bitovi today is sponsoring for pizza and beer, so woo! Big shout out to them. Yes, clap. And we've got Village Brewery beer. You guys are here over at Assembly, and then we've got Startup Calgary and Petrofeed are helping out with stuff. So I believe Petrofeed is also hiring, so if you guys are looking, I think they're hiring a bunch of different spots. So if you head over to their website, they've got a bunch of postings right now. What else? Last month, so I gave a talk about React, basically a bunch. It's up on YouTube, and slide deck is up on through the website, and any of the code stuff that I walked through is up on GitHub. And then, I think let's get Derek up here to give an intro to Ethereum.
Good. We'll just plug her in here.
Patience while we switch computers here.
Sorry, I was going to drive.
No problem.
Sorry. There we go. Can you hear me? How's that? Can you hear me in the back there? Well, thanks, David and Eric, for having me here.
We're
going to plug back in.
Do you need to plug it in on this side or just that side?
Should be just here.
Okay.
We'll see it on Hangout.
Worst case, you could just share David's screen because it's on Hangout.
Yeah. Can do this full screen.
I know, that really annoys me too.
I guess, you could share Dave's. It's not showing up on there. Let's try technical difficulties. Yeah, we're on HDMI. Okay, why don't we just, there we go. All right, I'm going to hit the lights so we can see a little better. Perfect. I'm not going to hit the lights.
Is that too dark?
No, go. Do it.
Okay. Well, thanks, Derek and David, for having me here. Or Eric, sorry. My name is Derek. I'm here to give you a quick 5-minute presentation here on Ethereum.
Sorry, do you want to just mute your audio?
Right there?
Let's try that.
Okay. So let me start this intro with just a graphical representation of a distributed network. What you see, the little dots there will represent peer-to-peer nodes and the distance between them, latency. And as the latency changes, you see them kind of adjust, and maybe the darker colors could represent the amount of information being transferred or data rates. So we talk about distributed networks or Ethereum. This is kind of the basis of what I'd want you to think about in the back of your mind when we go through this. So So it's been in our lifetime, if you look back to other, like your grandparents or prior to them, where you came from, it's been a pretty exciting last 40 or 50 years as far as technological advancements and disruptive technologies and how we live our life today compared to previous generations. Of course, the advent of the fax, internet, mobile cell phone, the whole idea of taking your phone with you is such an alien concept for humanity that we seem to just take it for granted. Smartphone technology, social networking, 3D printing, and of course, Internet of Things, and blockchain technology, which kind of ties into Internet of Things and social networking as well, and probably ties into smartphone marketing. So Theorem was founded by Vitalik Buterin in 2014. He's 21 years old and a computer science guy. And he comes from the Bitcoin space. And he wrote for Bitcoin magazine, tons and tons of articles. He's very proficient in the underlying mechanics of Bitcoin technology. So in 2014, he won the technology award, a World Technology Award for IT software, and he beat out Mark Zuckerberg, which was a major contender there, of course. And he kind of joined that little Hall of Fame with Bill Gates and James Cameron, Peter Manus, and Miyamoto from, I believe he's from Nintendo, and Tim Berners-Lee, kind of the architect of the internet as we know it today. Won a $100,000 bonus there, Peter Thiel Award last year for innovation. And in 2014 had a crowdsource or crowdfunding on their website, and they raised $18 million in about 20 days. So that much muscle behind this guy, he's got to be doing something. He's got a huge community standing behind him. He's all for open source and democracy and all things internet. So what is Ethereum? Ethereum essentially is an open sourced, decentralized operating system that operates across an encrypted, distributed network. It has three pillars or three core concepts that are built into it, the protocol. And one is the graphic user interface, which has a built-in browser and it works with consensus, contracts, relationships, and reputation models. Whisper, which is a publication and storage protocol, which in this case, I'm going to diverge here a bit with the permanence. Our internet today it's kind of degrading over time. It's evaporating as links servers go down, hard drives fail. You'll get a 401 error when you click on a link. It just doesn't exist anymore. Ethereum actually wants to integrate permanence into the internet as we know it today. So if you click on 300 years from now, you click on a link, it'll be there. Swarm, it's a messaging feed, push-pull, almost like an RSS protocol. So it's essentially decentralized disruptive technology. So if you could think back to Napster, BitTorrent, we see Tor, and of course Bitcoin. And what he's done is taken the core technology mechanics of Bitcoin, which is still around today and very robust, mind you. He's taking the engine from Bitcoin and creating something much better, much better from it. So can you sort of see that? So why do you guys care for JavaScript? Well, the front end in Ethereum is going to be built on JavaScript. So today we kind of have front end here, back end here with servers. It's kind of a traditional model. And then you've got your transport layer here through SMTP, FTP. And Ethereum proposes on a node-based level this sort of arrangement. So the node can only see adjacent nodes. It can't see 3 or 4 past, and it has no server. So the three pillars, both Ethereum, Swarm, and Whisper, will work in conjunction on the distributed network, completely secure, encrypted, and the applications will run with HTML on DApp, which is a decentralized application, with JavaScript at its core. So currently there's a list of applications that are being built in development right now. I don't have time to get into these, but you can go on the website and check them out. This is part of the object layering, or sorry, the visual graphic user interface for object programming. And I think the power to the JavaScript guys is that Ethereum is making it easier to do some of the back-end stuff that you don't see, like the Python stuff. They're creating more or less just drag and drop interface where you can enter in your variables and your addresses and whatnot and make it a little easier for you. So why is it proposed to be disruptive? Well, as we have it here today, your standard model has the corporation at the top, you at the bottom, and you forfeit all your personal information, your data, your whereabouts, your associations, and you get some free apps for that. That's the trade-off. The guts of this is proprietary. You don't get to see it. It's on Google servers. The algorithms are top secret, and you don't really know what goes on behind the curtains. So this model here that Vitalik has proposed is that you replace the corporation with blockchain and interface with decentralized applications, and the guts, or the operating system, which is Ethereum, is open sourced. So you can see how it works. You can see what goes on, and all the information that travels through it is encrypted, so you can't see the variables, but you can see what shapes the variables. And of course, you have control of all your data and give away what you please. So the current state of Ethereum right now, we're in the initial phase where we're trying to build out the distributed network. So we're creating nodes, and a testnet is in place, and there's probably a couple hundred nodes up. Guys are running little mining software, getting graphics cards online, and trying to create these nodes on a community level, and that's being set as a testnet. I'm going to skip that slide here. So 3 other milestones coming up in the future. So once the network is created, we're going to test contract use. So there's another beta test that's going to be done on the network. So now we have the infrastructure to play on, and we're going to check it out for abuse and spamming and denial of service and extra loading and whatever hackers might want to bring to the table. Metropolis, that's when it's ready for the masses. That's when they propose it'll be ready for non-technical users, so have a really simplistic browser window and function. And then Serenity, when the security is all approved and it's basically obviously ready for market with a couple of tweaks, and where they transfer the proof of work format to the proof of stake, which I can get to at another time. So I've only have 5 minutes to go through a very complex subject, but if you have any questions or if it piques your interest, come join us at the Calgary Original Meetup. You can search on meetup.com. Just type in Ethereum with 3 E's. Thanks for having me, guys.
Awesome.
So yeah, let's shoot around some questions. I know I got a couple. So what? And we talked a little bit last meetup. So these are kind of leading questions for me. But what can people build with Ethereum, or like what's kind of the goal? So my understanding of it from last time we talked was that basically you've got stuff like Amazon, like AWS, or you got stuff like Google App Engine or other proprietary systems like platforms that companies allow you to build on top of, or they provide free applications. But what you guys are doing is allowing people to actually do that across a decentralized distributed network, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so what are the types of applications that you guys are looking at seeing, and can you give an example of like a couple of the apps that you're doing that are being built as kind of prototypes or tests right now?
Yeah. Let's see here. There's a number of apps that you can see being built on their website, and I've got a short list here. I don't want to get into it because it might throw the projector off here, but
Sure.
There's an interesting, in a university in the States there, they had a professor kind of talk to his students, and he had about 100 students in his class, and he brought up this big jar of jelly beans, set it on the table, and he said, everybody put their guess on a piece of paper and send it in to me. So he got the stats back from the 100 students, and nobody got the answer right. But what was interesting was that everybody that was there had guessed on a standard deviation 3%. They were within 3% of the correct answer. And in most instances, that's good enough. So that's sort of an example of sort of a distributed network. If we can tap into that distributed space, gather information, and we could come on some paramount truths and understand what people are doing, I guess, but on an open source level. So there's plenty of opportunity for contracts in law and finance, and of course bad guys can get in there and do stuff. I'm sure there's going to be a Silk Road on it, and some other items too, like BitTorrents and file sharing with media, and of course the Fox won't be happy with that, but it's sky's the limit. So does that sort of answer your question? Yeah.
Does anybody have any other questions? Did you say you guys are doing another meetup?
Yeah, we've got one. I believe it's on the 17th.
Okay.
Just on Waves. Waves got Waves Coffee House has a boardroom upstairs. So if you want any in-depth, we're under a crunch of time here. So if you want any in-depth questions answered, I'd be happy to accommodate you. So
sounds good. Yeah, it's a pretty complex thing. I know when we were talking last month that basically they're giving you a distributed platform as a service. So rather than a single corporation owning and giving you multiple nodes which are distributed, you're actually doing that on a peer-to-peer basis, which is kind of interesting because now you don't have one single entity that knows about what you're doing, that can control what you're doing, that can shut down what you're doing, and it makes it a lot easier for you to move across nodes on the network as well. So for robustness, it's kind of interesting. So what they're doing is actually pretty cool. Very complex though, so I definitely encourage you to go check out the in-depth.
Just a quick thing.
Yeah.
So one thing that you get with a lot of these services like Google is that they are investigating, hacks and all that. So how does this system approach that? How do you know that your data is safe?
So I'm going to repeat. So basically, like services like Google and Amazon stuff, they work to actively prevent hacking attempts. So how does that happen with Ethereum, or how does that prevent?
I think at the core you have an encryption layer. So everything about any kind of data transfer is encrypted on the nodes. It's almost, in a sense, because it's almost hacked up and distributed. It's hard for a hacker to pinpoint that data when it could be it's fractionated. So I would tend to say that centralized networks and corporations like Home Depot and Google haven't done a good job at protecting our data. So which creates a huge open spot for Ethereum to step in. I mean, Home Depot lost how many hundreds of thousands of credit card numbers, and that got hacked. I mean, the list goes on and on. There's a Facebook hack, Walmart, you can go through it. So the fact is that when you have a centralized network, you have a single point of failure. You have a single point of where the information is stored, and you can get at that. And you've got a place where people can shut you down or snoop on you. So
it'd be a lot more work to actually, because you'd actually have to target individual people if you're trying to hack, as opposed to just one central spot where you get millions of emails.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. You'd have to know how to attack all of the adjacent nodes, right? Especially in like a DDoS setting, like a denial of service attack, for example, which happens pretty frequently. companies work pretty hard to mitigate those, while having a totally decentralized network that's actually using smaller individual nodes is a lot harder to attack. One other thing, if you don't have a seat, break up that cube at the back. There's a whole bunch of cubes. Those are totally for sitting on or laying on if there's enough of them. You can just starfish. Okay, any other questions? Nope. All right, let's thank you, Derek.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, next up we've got Dave and Alexis. While we switch computers, opportune time to grab a beer or more pizza if you're still hungry. Thank you. And let's give ourselves, you guys have a light slide deck. Let's give us a bit more light. That one? Yeah, that one.
Check, check.
Good.
Right on. All right. I think we're good. Oh, that would help with it. Sweet. All right. How's it going, guys? Good. Welcome. For those that are here for the first time, I am also here for the first time. My name is Alexis Abril. I'm David's colleague at Bitovi. We do JavaScript stuff, which is kind of cool. I am from Dallas, Texas, which is a lot like Calgary, turns out, which is kind of nice. When I was visiting, I didn't realize it would be that similar. We don't have anything nearly as groundbreaking as that to go through, but hopefully we'll take up a little bit of your time and share a few things. So we came across this topic. David actually proposed this topic a while back. Like I said, we do consulting, get rid of that, JavaScript consulting at Bitovi. We've been doing it for quite some time. We've seen a lot of projects succeed and a few fail, more than a few fail, for various different reasons. So something we've done recently in the past year is we started to compile all the things that, all the reasons that we consider like really high factors in our project success rate. So we used our own history as a case study, basically. What we saw were stress points and what we saw helped move projects along a little bit quicker. So don't worry, if you're here for the code, we will talk a little bit about the code too. All right, there we go. This is full screen. Oh, presentation mode? Whatever. All right. What is Bitovi? Who we are? What do we do? So what Bitovi primarily does is provide open source tools help you build your applications. These are the tools that we've built over the years to help us deliver client projects, and we've released them onto the world. It all started with JavaScript Mvc. Has anyone heard that term, JavaScript Mvc? I'm sure you've heard the term JavaScript and MVC, but there is an OS collection of tools called JavaScript Mvc. We released this back in 2007. There's a slide, I think the next slide actually shows a timeline, but I'm gonna try to remember this off the top of my head. And over the course of some time, we've broken this original framework out into a bunch of different little micro frameworks for you to use and build your applications. Document.js, the most exciting thing in the world. It builds documentation for you. I know you guys were really here to hear about that. FuncUnit, here to test. We're going to do a little demo with that a little later about functional testing. Steel is our module loader. jQuery++ is a bunch of really cool little add-ons for jQuery. If you're not familiar with that, definitely check it out. You could drop that into your jQuery apps today. Most of jQuery++ is already starting to get merged into jQuery core, so eventually that project will just disappear entirely. And CanJS, which is our MV star framework. And we can show you guys a little bit about that too. But here's our timeline. Over the course of these years, we started back in 2007. This is JavaScript MVC. We got a little history of a few other frameworks to show you the timeline. We rebranded our MV Star framework from jQuery MX, which was jQuery with extensions, back in the old days, to CanJS, because you can build the application you need to. It was such a cheesy presentation. You guys should have been there for it. It was awesome. In 2013, we rebranded it and broke ourselves off from the jQuery hard dependency. Now we're agnostic. So if you wanted to use CanJS with Dojo, MooTools, YUI, Zepto, or jQuery, you could totally do that. But this is kind of where we came from and how we got to today. The biggest thing we can advocate in terms of what we've built in OS tool sets is not necessarily the best. I don't think any framework can say objectively the best of one thing, except for the longevity. We've built a lot of applications over a long period of time, so we've been able to see what APIs fail, what tools fail, and what projects fail in general, or why they fail. So with this compendium of UI knowledge, we've created something called the Bitovi checklist, or nice little cheesy, again, blog post. You can tell we don't have a marketing team. We're a team of developers. Our checklist for success. This is pretty cool. Definitely check this out, blog.bitovi.com. This is an entire, this is Brian, my boss, wrote this up. There's an entire series, and Justin giving a different version of this talk, on how to mitigate risk when you're building your applications. Typically, how many people here maintain large legacy applications as just day to day? And it's really risky. How many of those people, how many have like 100% test coverage with documentation everywhere you need to? One kind of, even the one kind of. All right, cool. So anytime I'm in a larger application, especially if you're a consultant, that's when you're digging into somebody else's large application and they say, build this feature. And it's probably a pretty simple feature, maybe something you wouldn't consider too difficult, and then you hit a point in the project where you realize, I need to change a legacy service. I need to change this legacy model. Something needs to change in the legacy code, and maybe nothing breaks that day. You don't see it. It's something small. So things like this, we're gonna go over a lot of different things in this checklist to help you kind of mitigate that type of risk. For us, this is all we do, is jump into other people's giant legacy apps. Who wants to do that 8 hours a day? No? All right. This is actually pretty cool. If you check this out, Bitovi GitHub.io/checklist, it's actually interactive. It's a whole form. It's pretty large. We're gonna go through some of these topics. And behind the scenes, we've kind of associated risk factors to this in a numeric form. So at the end, we'll give you a percentage of what we think our best guess is a good, project success rate. This is 100% going to fail if you don't do these other factors, kind of stuff. Not 100%. Hopefully not 100%. Typically, you want to do this, a good exercise if you have any kind of retro perspectives. If you have a project or a release you've done recently, these are really, really good to go through this checklist if you consider that a success or a failure, to go back in time and say, hey, these are the reasons we fail. As developers, typically when we're building our projects, we get emotionally wrapped up in them. So if it's a failure, we'll probably call it a success. If it's a success, we'll still call it a success. Or vice versa. If it's something, the project was a great success, but your feature didn't make it in for whatever reason, maybe you personally consider that project a failure. So it's nice to have these kind of objective bullet points to say, hey, this is what we're actually trying to do. The architecture wasn't the one I wanted. It's a little less efficient, but the new release did generate an extra 0.1% in revenue. Is that success or failure kind of stuff? So we go over quite a few things. We've broken this up into 3 categories: development decisions, design decisions, and management philosophies. Those are 3 major kind of approaches. Management, things such as, what is this project's vision? How are you going to measure success? So we recently wrapped up mobile Sam's Club. I don't know if you guys shop on Sam's online, but the mobile version was one of our projects recently. And I remember our lead designer, Tom, had a great presentation for this kind of stuff. We didn't approach this from a developer perspective. I totally would have said, we can make your views render 50% faster, or we can, reduce stress on your database by, X number of cycles, whatever. But a top-level executive at a corporation does not even know what those terms mean. We approached it with, hey, we're going to redesign your site, we're going to refactor things, but the goal is going to be 1% extra conversion rate on sales. That's a really difficult kind of thing for a developer to comprehend. Is at the end of the day, these applications we're building typically make money or have some other non-development result. So one of the biggest things in our projects, right at the start, even if you're building a feature for a legacy application, how are you going to how do you measure success is how we're going to move the project forward. What would your manager, the client you're working for, what do they consider successful? And that's where you can really make sure you deliver or over-deliver, which is what we try to do. Strategy for accomplishing goals, project's roadmap. Really, I think it's on here, maybe not on this section of the page. What can contribute to this project's failure? What are the bullet points you would consider, hey, this is going to stop us from succeeding at all? It could be the process, how we develop. We've had scenarios where we have to, connect to a client's VPN, remote into their machine, open up the UI on their machine, and do the code through that kind of tunnel, which sounds crazy. In IE8, I'm sorry, yeah, in an older browser. And that kind of setup, immediately, before you even get started on the project, you would say, this is something that could cause this project to fail. I don't know if anybody's tried that kind of stuff, but it's really slow. So immediately, whatever kind of timelines you have, they've gone out the window. Do employees go through technical trainings? This is huge. How many of your employers today, how many people are primarily JavaScript developers in the crowd, by the way? Show of hands. Right on. Primarily Java developers in the crowd? C#? Ruby? Python? Other? Right, all right, cool. Oracle. Right on. So something we really, really advocate, typically when you've been a developer for longer than a year, you consider yourself an expert in whatever field you're in. But trainings, intercompany trainings are huge. I do JavaScript 8 hours a day. I would still love to hear more about different theories, how people take different approaches in different languages. Right now there's a huge kind of sweeping revolution on, hey, let's get back to functional programming. They did some really good things. And that's been around for quite some time. If you come from Lisp, Scheme, or those types of languages, you know about these concepts. This is still just starting to become a thing in JavaScript. You have things like Bacon, any kind of streaming APIs. So we want to make sure if you're in a bubble, I did .NET programming for about 8-9 years, and I lived in a bubble. I did not realize there was things outside of Microsoft's world until I was introduced to Ruby on Rails. When you're in that kind of bubble, you want to make sure your company is offering trainings. You're coming out to meetups. That's a huge step on your own. You're taking your own personal time to listen to some random person talk about something you're probably already an expert in. But getting those trainings is huge for success rates. Who has the final say in content and copy decisions? I'm not going to go through each of these bullet points, but that's one of my favorites. Design. A good design typically makes, from a UI's perspective, I'm biased because I do the UIs mostly. A great design architecture typically makes my job as a developer way easier. I had a recent client, not a recent client, I guess in the last year, where they were building a mobile application, and they had a design kind of pre-made. This is kind of what we want our prototype to look like. I said, cool. You have a screen. If you swipe right, it shows something. If you swipe left, it shows something. If you swipe up, down, whatever. There's all these different interactions. And I was like, as a developer, I'm thinking, oh yeah, I can do this. I can swipe left. It'll trigger this controller to instantiate, whatever. Our designer came in and for just like a 2-hour little proposal kind of session, a review. And the first thing he said is remove all the swipes. He said there's no actual intrinsic value in having these swipes. They're all going to be achieved in this other fashion, and you're going to be disrupting the built-in functionality. If on a phone, depending on what device you have, those swipes probably already have actions. That's a thought that never had even crossed my mind. All I was thinking about was binding to swipes. And he said, don't do it. I was like, that's a good idea. Luckily, the client agreed to it. But a strong design will typically make our lives much, much easier at the start of a project. If you guys are anything like me, then I'm sorry. But when I get a feature request, especially when I wrote .NET, when I would get a feature request, we'd have typically the team would sit around a table, somebody would be pitching the idea, and immediately 4 people at the table, including myself, are already starting to sketch out the stored procedures for that feature. Because like, oh, this is how it's going to be. Take a step back until the design is kind of finalized, because as soon as you leave that room, that design is going to change. Something will be modified. They'll be shown to some other executive who couldn't make the meeting. The client or users will get to see it and say, you know what? We don't need this section of the page. Well, that changes the data model, and that changes the stored procedure that you just wrote. So design decisions up front, we really consider huge to success. Reduces dev time and reduces just a lot of churn in the code, which is really nice. People like each other. There's some fun categories in here that are pretty straightforward. User testing, A/B testing. A lot of these factors you may notice are coming back to design. So I'm going to skip ahead to the next slide. Definitely check this out. Fill this out. It's a nice little exercise for previous projects. One of the biggest things we learned, which was a surprise in projects that we had that failed and projects that we had that succeeded, the biggest factor we had in our failed contracts over the course of the last 8 years was design and management factors, not development factors. Typically, the developer can always code their way around something. You can find a way to make it work, even if it's the wrong way. You can still make it work. But whether or not the client considers your project success is based on management and design, which is really, really key. We didn't just make this up. David actually did a pretty comprehensive case study on our own internal projects. I'll let David talk about this here in a second, but we went through that checklist for every client we've ever had in Bitovi's history. We filled it out. We defined our success, because success can be defined as many different things. Our version, our definition of success was, did we complete this project on the original scheduled timeline, and did we go over budget? Did we stay under budget, I should say? If those two bullets were met, we considered our project a success. We broke this into quite a few different categories. David, did you want to talk about the correlation at all for this?
Yeah, I just realized that it's going to be pretty quick. But I had the fun task of going into Google spreadsheet, which is actually much nicer than Excel, by the way, and calculate all this stuff. But it was interesting to see, and the correlations that we calculated basically meant -1 to 0 is a negative correlation, so it's nothing to do with what we want to measure. 0 is no correlation. 1-0 correlation that we had is, do you use source control? Well, it turned out that we use source control for everything, so you can't say if it has anything to do with projects, it says not. And then between 0 and 1, correlation means that it affects project success or failure rate. And the higher the number, the closer to 1 it is, the more it factors in. And it was actually, yeah, pretty interesting because, you know, as developers, we would like to think that development is the most important part of a project. But on the other hand, I don't think if anybody has ever quit of like, hey, those guys don't use semicolons in the JavaScript code, I totally can't work with them. So usually if people quit, it has other reasons than specific technical reasons, especially in management, because if you have a valid technical concern and it's not being heard, that's more a management problem than a technical problem. So development factors were usually between 0.2 and 0.28. We found that code reviews and documentation is super important, and Eric and I talked about it a lot. It's also super easy to do. Make a pull request, have another pair of eyes on it, and all of a sudden your code quality and knowledge goes up significantly. Documentation sucks, but doing it actually helps because we usually work on projects with, what was the biggest project developer-wise that we ever had? I don't know. Between 2 and 40 people. I'm pulling this out of the air. I'm actually about 20, 25 developers. So you have to be able to pull people and get them up to speed quickly. Then design is like correlates twice as important. So what Alexis already mentioned, user testing. So you need a QA team. And I noticed myself as a developer working with a great QA team is actually pretty cool because they find a bug, they tell you exactly what it is, and we're going to talk about FuncUnit because we can actually write tests for their bug to reproduce it and then fix it to make sure that it doesn't happen again. More about that later. But having a good QA team is really important, and it doesn't have to be like a separate QA team. Maybe it's just, you know, actual users using your app before you release it and be like, hey, all of this stuff is broken. I don't know how it works. That kind of testing. And then design documentation, having like style guides and things like that actually turn out to be quite a factor too, because CSS can get pretty messy. Actually more messy than normal code pretty quickly. So if you don't have a clear documentation, that's why Bootstrap and things like that is so successful. It's a development thing, but it's actually a design factor. To have that documented well is really, really important so that when new people come in, they don't think, oh, I have to write this CSS over again. But the biggest factors were management. And maybe it's surprising, maybe it's not surprising, but if there is no vision, goals, or strategy that is clearly defined, you know, when every other week the stakeholders come in and be like, you know, I changed my mind, let's scratch all of this and change it. There's nothing you can do. You have to rewrite sometimes all the code. So a vision, goal, and strategy, and communicating that clearly with everybody is really important. I actually just read a book. It was called, now I forgot it. It talked a lot about visions and goals and strategies, and that's the most important part of any product or anything, because if you can communicate that clearly, then you'll be much more on track with all those other decisions. And then this is also important, especially since our stuff moves really quickly. With a release with less than 6 months, what's the biggest factor, right? Release time of less than 6 months. So if you have a project that's running before you make a release for a year and a half, your success goes down like pretty much exponential. So release early and release often is not just a startup mantra. It's actually helps for any kind of project everywhere. And any project with less than 6 months was significantly more successful for us than projects that had like a year or a year and a half. And people always say, oh yeah, but it's so complicated and so complex, right? We're building enterprise applications that takes a year. And it's like, no, it doesn't. You just got to figure out the right vision, goals, and strategy to actually make sure that you release something in less of the time that you think the entire project takes. So that was our takeaway. And that was pretty important because now we can communicate with our clients objectively and say, hey, you know, you have no idea what you actually want. Let's talk about that before we try to convince you to use CanJS, or you try to convince us that you really want to use Angular. So there's a lot of soft factors in there, and that's the main thing we always realized for us. It's you come in and they hire you as a consultant, as a developer, and there's a lot of soft management that has to go in, sometimes even more than actually coding. Unfortunately, sometimes. But it's also interesting and you learn a lot. I think that's all I had to say.
Right
Did I
on.
forget something? No.
Sounds good to me.
All right.
Yeah, these bullet points, these are the largest factors, are not the fun things we like to think about as developers. Huge to a project success. Okay. Rather than talk to you guys about all that stuff all day, show you a little bit of code. So one of the things we use, one of the tools we've built over the years to help us with user testing, specifically if you get a scenario back from the QA team, or you're dropped into a legacy application and you need to make some modifications, but they have no test coverage as is, we developed FunkUnit for this purpose. I'll show you guys a little demo here what this does while I'm talking about it. Here's a little demo. This is funkunit.com. You may recognize the older version of the to-do app, and you should update the styles here eventually. I'm going to hit run tests and walk away from this if I click it. There it goes. Okay. What this is doing is actually typing in, simulating user interactions. If you guys have worked with Selenium at all, that is very similar to what's going on here. The original version of FunkUnit was actually built on Selenium. And it took us 4 years to realize, maybe 6 years to realize, we could just emulate these actions. We don't actually need Selenium, which is a pretty large application. So we built FunkUnit and Syn for synthetic JS to help simulate user interactions. This is typically what we do when we get into a client's app for the first time. Most legacy applications don't have great test coverage, and immediately you're asked to, the reason you were hired was to build some new feature and integrate it into their application. So right off the bat, what we do is come up with some high critical scenarios. The user needs to type into this input, and if they type and hit enter, this thing should happen. So these are tests written from the user's perspective, not the developer perspective. There's a distinction here I'll make in a second. Once you have that scenario wrapped up, or once QA says, hey, if I click on this, this breaks, then you can wrap this in a functional test and guarantee you're not actually breaking or regressing the app any further. This is what those look like. I have a little test here. Let me blow this away for the moment. Here's our nice little hello world test. Let me tell you what this is doing. I'll give you a, well, I guess the skin's not gonna let me change to a lighter color. FunkUnit is not meant to compete with any of the open source unit testing libraries today, QUnit, Mocha, or Jasmine. It's actually meant to cooperate with those. So FunkUnit brings a synchronous pattern to kind of an asynchronous world, so you can script actions very easily and run this in whatever framework you're used to. In this case, we're using QUnit. So I'm going to tell FunkUnit, when it's ready to run assertions, run it through QUnit's assertions. That's the part we care about. What we're going to do, I have a nice little app open here. Let me open this other window. Test CanJS. So here is the new version of the To-Do MVC app. It's really light on this projector. You can see this at todomvc.com if you're unfamiliar with this. Adi Osmani's got a good little project that shows you how to write this same app in a plethora of different MV star frameworks. That way you can kind of gauge a little bit of a difference. It's not the best gauge. Don't hold everybody to that, but it's a nice little dip your toes in the water litmus test. So in our test, what we can do, all I'm saying here is in QUnit, if you're not familiar with QUnit, you have a little setup module. You can do things before each test, after each test, before all the tests, or tear down after all the tests are run. On this, I'm going to say before each test, go ahead and open this directory, which is right here. This is actually a URL. I'm just saying relative to this test file, open the can.js folder, which has an index HTML. To be very verbose, I could say index.html, and that should be fine. What this is going to do, if I run this test file, is it's going to pop open a window, and in theory, we would have some test scripting actions on this window. Now, in this case, I just said, OK, true. So it's just going to give us a nice little green indicator. But if I were to pop in what I had a second ago, I'll go through what that is here and refresh. We should see, if I refresh and then clear my cache, how about that? We should see it start running all of the tests that we scripted, which is pretty cool. Let me slow this down. F.speed, 100 milliseconds. Speed is a function, right? I feel like it is. We're going to find out. No, did not like that. It's not a function. Equals 100. There. I just added a 100 millisecond timer in between for dramatic effect so you guys can see it actually typing it out. How many of you have written Selenium scripts in the past? Do you guys enjoy that process at all? Really? Nobody knows Selenium proponents? I've met one in my career. I met one. We really didn't like it. Selenium scripts have a tendency to get stale very quickly. There is the macro recorder for Selenium, which is kind of nice. But usually with UIs, especially with richer and richer UIs, you start writing custom stuff into the scripts, and those can kind of get into a pain. So what we've done is given you a jQuery-esque API. You can see an F, and then you'll see a very similar selector. And we've given you an Actions API on our jQuery selector. So what FunkUnit does is it opens up another window, which is the way I like to test the most. Have your application kind of in a pristine state, its natural state, versus injecting scripts into that window. We open it in another window, and we have an Actions API, which lets you do things to that window. So in our case, the first test, all it's doing is it's looking for an input or something with an ID of new to do, which happens to be an input. And then we're saying type into that input these particular strings. You can do key presses. We have a syntax for that. If you use the bracket notation, we'll let you press things like enter and delete. And then we're going to assert, after those things are typed and you hit enter, that some labels showed up that they are visible. You'll notice this is an asynchronous application. There's nothing that says when you type into the input that the label instantaneously appears. Maybe it makes a server request. Maybe it just takes a really long time for that label to show up. This assertion, if it was an asynchronous running of this application, should fail immediately, even if the label shows up after a little while. What FunkUnit is doing so that you can write this in kind of a human understandable fashion is we have a wait API where any kind of visible or missing, all of these assertions will actually wait for a period of time. It'll time out after 10 seconds or 5 seconds until this assertion is true. So if this assertion is false for any reason, it'll just stop and wait for 5 seconds to see if something happens that makes this assertion pass. If nothing passes after 5 seconds, then the test bombs. Does that make sense? Yeah? It's You could write this in an asynchronous way, but which would be faster. But with a lot of assertions, if you guys have done any heavy node programming, this could be really, really a really nasty looking test versus something that almost a QA department could write. Hey, what are the steps to make this fail? Well, type into this input, hit enter, and you're going to see the bomb right off the bat. Oh, my screen share got lost?
It's just a, sorry.
Okay. Sweet. We also have drivers for QUnit, Jasmine, or Mocha. Right now we're on Jasmine 1.3, but we do have a 2.0 adapter ready to be shipped as soon as somebody can get some free time to do it. We will get that out as well. So if you're interested in any of those others, if those are your flavors of choice, you could totally run that as well. Here's the Jasmine version of this. It's going to run the same tests. I'll let it run. Sweet. And you have our Jasmine 1.3 runner at the bottom. So whichever your flavor happens to be, we'll try to accommodate as much as possible. But testing is one of the single biggest factors. User testing, preventing regressions is one of the single biggest factors in terms of delivering on time. Even if it's a greenfield project, we've kind of helped ourselves. I know TD is a huge kind of buzzword, but in large client applications, I rarely see that kind of approach. We like to code, and typically even managers are attuned to it, saying, hey, we don't have enough time for testing or documentation. So it's something we want to make sure we kind of strive for ourselves. It does take a little bit of discipline. I don't think any developer ever said, I'm going to go home tonight and write some tests. Yes. So in our case, here's the To-Do MVC app. We give you a whole walkthrough on this. I'm not going to walk you guys through the entire thing, but definitely check it out. If you're unfamiliar with some of the other MV Star frameworks, it's that same app written in N number of flavors, all kinds of stuff. So it's a nice little litmus. I'm going to let David get up here in a second to talk about how we run these tests. So right off the bat, running the tests in a browser, that's what you kind of want since we typically write our applications in a browser. But we need some way to automate this because developers are lazy. And even if we have a set of tests, we will stop running them as soon as our attention is diverted very, very quickly. So one step as we get closer and closer to continuous integration and the continuous integration slide is we want to automate everything we just did. So I'm going to quit Canary. And I'm going to run. Testy is a node runner. I'm going to tell you about this, what it is actually, after I run this. Browsers, Canary. Ooh, I want to say comma Firefox, but I didn't test that before I got here. We'll run this one way first. So right off the bat, Testy opens up a new instance of Canary. It starts running the tests. We get the same interaction we saw a second ago. Do a little dance until this finishes. And sweet, closes up the browser, go back to the terminal, we get all of our reporting back on the terminal. This is a nice automated way to trigger a browser, run your tests, and get reporting back, which is typically what you want. A lot of us, especially in JavaScript UI development, run tests through headless browsers. If you're using Zombie in the old days, Phantom, any version. But none of your applications typically support. Your support matrix probably doesn't have Phantom as a requirement. Phantom is headless WebKit. If you guys are familiar with Chrome, it used to be built on WebKit. Now it's built on Blink. Safari is built on WebKit, a newer version of WebKit, not the same version that Phantom uses. So typically, if it passes in Phantom, congratulations. That's the only thing. The only thing you can ensure is like this app works in Phantom. Your users probably aren't using that. So you want to have some kind of environment where you can actually test this in the browsers you support. So Testy has a nice API for this kind of stuff. I know Firefox. Oh, you want to try Canary reporter spec? Spec.
That gives you like
All right. So what Testy does, it's a node runner. That's all it is. It can run, I'm using it to run FuncUnit tests. Because FuncUnit is working with QUnit reporting or Jasmine or Mocha reporting, you can use any of the standard runners to run this test, to run these tests. In our case, we're using Testy. Testy as just a runner. So Testy and FuncUnit are two completely separate things. You can use Testy to run your QUnit tests. It might be stuck. Firefox is always a little slow. Testy is a very alpha project right now. 0.2, bam. But you can use it for reporting in a number of different fashions. You guys use continuous integration in your applications. Does anyone here use Jenkins by chance? Yeah, a couple people. You guys familiar with the XUnit reporter? Have you guys heard of XUnit? So XUnit is a test XML format. I know that sounds really exciting. So that Jenkins can consume and give you nice reports on your tests or failures. I'm like, oh, hey, I did not do anything. I think that just took forever to finish. 32 passing tests in Firefox and Canary. It opened up both and quit both browsers. Oh, okay. It's reporter, isn't it? Reporter. All right.
So you actually see what tests.
Yeah, I'm going to kill Firefox so we can make this run a little faster. And I'm going to change the spec to XUnit. Is that right? Capital X, capital U? Sounds right to me. There's a bunch of different reporters that we ship with Testy. XUnit is one of them. So if you're interested in running this in kind of a VM and CI environment, you can do the same thing we just did. I should probably kill that speed thing. That's what's making this all slow. And then if I go back here, there's a nice XML output that Jenkins can parse, and you get nice pretty graphs on what failed and what didn't fail. Couple this with any kind of hook you have on your source control, if you're using Subversion, Git, TFS, etc. Pretty much everybody has a way to say do stuff on commit. So you can just take this setup, run it on commit, and have your nice pretty graphs that say, hey, our dev team is Testy has a really, really rich API, very alpha, but it's got a really rich API if you're familiar with Browser Stack. Anyone here familiar with Browser Stack? Does anyone use Browser Stack actively? And they're okay, a few less. All right. So for those that are not familiar with Browser Stack is a nice kind of setup. Got it. Wow, this is a new, I haven't been here in a while.
Yeah, they updated the UI recently.
Yeah, that looks kind of cool. So you can see here on the left side, I have a list of operating systems, and on the right side, we have a list of browsers and versions. So I need to test today in Windows 8 and IE Metro. And there we go. You can see the nice little Internet Explorer bar on the bottom. What this is doing is basically starting up a little frame with a view into a VM that they've set up remotely, which is pretty cool on its own. Typically, if you want to see, hey, my browser, this application is failing in IE6 on this browser, you can go to Browser Stack if you don't want to install IE6 on your machine somewhere. Which is really, really handy. What is really handy is they have an API to spawn these VMs. So with Eric and David's help, they've been able to create this kind of way to communicate for Testy to communicate with Browser Stack. So if you have a Browser Stack account, you can actually, and they actually have a whole API section with how many streams you can set up. You can pass their VM a URL that it will load in an operating system and a browser of your choice. Using Testy's API, it can report everything it loaded, like the running of tests, back to Testy, and you still get your support. With all of this together, you can have an automated running support matrix for every browser, every OS version that you need to, running automatically on every Git commit or every release. That's not something typically I would want to run manually on every commit. If I made a quick bug fix, I'd run some smaller set of tests, push it to CI, and then let the CI server half an hour later tell me, hey, this failed in IE6. I'm like, okay, now we'll go check it out. But this is kind of nice to make sure you're covered. Because those are the worst bugs, typically. Those are the ones that slip through into production, is the ones that are outside of our normal scope. It works on my machine, that kind of stuff. So, any questions on any of this stuff? No? Cool. Did you want to talk a little bit about Testy? Did I see everything? We do.
Well, one thing is that
Go ahead.
there are services that do this, but if you can set it up for your own machines, like your own
Yeah.
and stuff like that too.
So one of the biggest things, yeah. So what we're doing with Testy, it brings a lot of this stuff in-house. A lot of our clients are big corporate organizations that don't like their stuff on GitHub and on Travis CI, etc. So when you have to bring this stuff in-house, this is a nice kind of way to set up your own private environments that don't have to go out into the world, which is kind of cool as an alternative. We typically provide grunt tasks for all Bitovi's projects. So if you're using anything with a Bitovi stamp on it that runs from Node, we'll typically give you guys a grunt task to run along with it. I don't need to talk about continuous integration anymore. I think we kind of beat that horse. Any questions on what we do? We'll be around a little bit for kind of an open QA thing here a little bit, I believe, right? Yeah, we'll stick around. If you're interested in anything JavaScript related at all, specifically on the UI side, yes, go for it.
You said that Testy is looking at alpha.
Yes.
But is FunkUnit, that's pretty solid?
FunkUnit has been out since 2009. We recently refactored it in, I think it was 2009, maybe it was 2010. We refactored it, Selenium out in 2013. It was fully removed. We just did a 3.0 release a couple weeks ago, and we probably have a patch release coming up in the next few days, I believe. So we're starting to be more and more actively maintained. But yeah, that's kind of one of our stronger baked projects is FunkUnit. Great question.
Yeah, it's pretty, like it's stable. You can go and start using it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, feel free, download that today, try it out. Oh, nice. There's my host from Airbnb. I'm visiting from Texas, so I was trying to get in touch with my host for a few days. I guess she's back. Me and David are going to stick around for a while. I know they're about to do some announcements with the upcoming meetups. If you're ever in Dallas, feel free to stop by the DallasJS meetup. I run the meetup there. Or, what's that?
It's our unofficial sister meetup.
The unofficial sister meetup is down in the south. You guys will be welcome out there. If you have any questions UI related in terms of building large applications with JavaScript, most of the stuff we talk about isn't actually tool based. I try not to say, hey, use this tool, use this other tool, because I'm very biased. But I will be happy to bring the theory behind why we choose some of the tools or why we do what we do when we're making architecture decisions or how we make our decisions. If you're interested in that kind of stuff, feel free. I've got nowhere to be. Thank you, guys. That's all I got. So.
All right, and next meetup, we're going to do July, when is it, 7th, right? July 7th. So we've again switched next month with Ruby YYC. So don't get confused and show up 2 weeks later because you'll be coming to Ruby and not the awesome JS meetup that Dave and I are putting together. So it's going to be Dave's last meetup. And then we got some pretty exciting stuff. Actually, we're going to do kind of a new release of Feathers, what we've been working on, but actually some of this cool AI stuff that Dave's been working on will be pretty exciting, I think. So he's going to do some stuff with natural speech recognition in the HTML5 speech API and kind of showing how you can integrate that with Feathers. So if you guys are around, come on out. We'll be here. And thanks again to Derek and Alexis for presenting today. So let's give them another round. Okay, thanks guys. We'll see you next month. Stick around if you guys have questions or want to drink more beer or eat more pizza. I think there's still tons of the back, so